Good morning. Welcome. I am super excited about today and our speaker this morning. So let us all start with a warm ABNY welcome for our Majority Leader of the New York State Senate, the President pro tempore. By the way, I had to look that up, wasn't quite sure exactly what that was. Please welcome Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Part of why I'm so happy to have her here with us is, well, she has been hard to book. And I really appreciate that. From the time I've spent with her, I've grown to know and respect the Majority Leader as a get-it-done rather than a talk-about-it politician. I take great stock in that approach at this moment. Every time I think civic and political life is going to settle down, make more sense, feel a little less like a headline grab, and more like a plan people couldn't hold on to, it seems to go in the opposite direction. It is in moments of change that we appreciate the consistency and passion of our ABNY community. As we all digest this recent election, those who wanted a different outcome and those who got the outcome they wanted, let's remember, we are all New Yorkers. We all want a bright future for our city and state and for our communities. We're joined today by a number of our elected officials, and I want to take a moment to recognize them and thank them for their public service. I just ask that you hold your applause until the end. State Senators Liz Krueger and Jessica Ramos, Assembly Members Alicia Hindman, Grace Lee, and Tony Simone, and Council Member Carlina Rivera, thank you all for what you do. And now on to our speaker. Andrea Stewart-Cousins is a deeply principled and highly effective public servant. Agree with her or disagree, she calls it like she sees it. And she has done something remarkable that was desperately needed. Andrea Stewart-Cousins is the woman who tamed the New York State Senate. Do you remember, not so long ago, how unusual a place the New York State Senate was? The IDC, the 3, sometimes 4 amigos, the leadership coups, the number of people who left their jobs in handcuffs. For a long time, the old Cindy Adams joke wasn't entirely off the mark. If you're indicted, you're invited. Andrea Stewart-Cousins has given this long-time famous legislative body a strong and stable footing. And with this last election, she just became the longest ever serving Democratic Majority Leader in the state Senate history, a credit to her character and to her many accomplishments. On her road to this moment, she has truly had a historic ascent, one that did not start in politics. She grew up in public housing on the Upper West Side and in the Bronx. She was a public school teacher. She spent most of her early career working for New York Telephone, what we now know today as AT&T, as a telemarketer. She was a working class mom living in Yonkers. Then she started to volunteer in Yonkers and was so successful at that the mayor named her the city's director of community affairs. From there, she began a political rise that would take her to the Westchester County Board of Legislators and all the way to the highest post in the New York State Senate. Her tenure as Majority Leader has been marked by numerous legislative accomplishments. She's done it by being dedicated to the quiet work of building consensus and smoothing over divisions before they become public spectacle. We respect that here at ABNY. At a time when politics is increasingly about spectacle, you have to admire a steady and wise hand to get things done. And though she is more apt to give credit to her legislative colleagues, it is safe to say the Majority Leader deserves her more than her fair share of credit too. Passing congestion pricing back in 2019, which was no small task, guaranteeing access to reproductive health and contraception, raising the minimum wage this past session, protecting our kids online against addictive social media feeds, and passing the state's landmark law to fight climate change, to name just a few. We're excited to hear from her today about what she hopes for the session ahead, her priorities, and how she is responding to this political moment. Please join me in welcoming Andrea Stewart-Cousins.
Thank you. Oh, good morning. Good morning. Come on, let's do it. Come on. Good morning. Good morning. There you go. There you go. So, Steve, thank you. He was telling me he was going to give me the 4-minute intro, and I was like, oh, do you have to? You know, you hate it when somebody's just reading the bio and just telling you what you could have read yourself. But the introduction, thank you, was personal. It was lovely. And, you know, I think that we have grown to mutually respect one another because of your advocacy. Part of the ability for us to pass that social media bill that really is directed at taking care of our kids was something that I had a conversation with him about, and we promised that we would work together. And so we couldn't have done it without your advocacy, and hopefully we lead the nation in protecting children from these harmful algorithms. So thank you so much, Steve. And you should give him some applause for that. And thank you for, which is why, you know, it's been hard to book me, he says, but, you know, I thought it was time. I thought it was time to come because, quite honestly, he convinced me that you're a great crowd. And he's right. There is, looking across the room, I know so many of you, and those of you I don't know, I'm looking forward to at least letting you get to know me. But clearly, you are what helps to make New York, you know, a wonderful place. And it is the partnership that we find in rooms like this that allow us to do the work that we must do on behalf of all of New York residents. I'm so happy to be joined by my legislative colleagues in the Assembly and the Senate, but I gotta shout out my 2 senators who are here, especially since one of them is practically responsible for me actually joining the Senate, and that is Senator Liz Krueger, who's my finance chair. Years ago, she was the head of DSCC, a job that Mike Gianaris, my deputy, now has. But she convinced me to run for Senate, and I did. And she also had been convinced, I guess, 2 years before that, 2 to 4 years before that. So we've been partners in this for a while. I must tell you that the first time I ran for Senate, I lost by 18 votes. And the longest unresolved race in New York history, we found out that I lost by 18 votes in the February of the following year. I know, it always, yeah. But here I am. And so that's, you know, you do it again. You do it again, you know. So I just want I want to set the stage, but, you know, because some people are feeling like, you know, with elections and all. But, you know, things change. You just got to keep yourself focused. I also want to recognize Senator Jessica Ramos, who is my labor chair. And one of the, you know, up-and-comings, I'm sure you hear her name in a variety of places, but, you know, we have an incredible Senate. And as I said, we are, you know, a diverse, demographically, geographically, in every kind of way, the most diverse Senate that has ever been in the chamber. And we are able, I think, in many ways, to bring the perspective of New York to our table. And Steve, that's how we do it. We sort it through. We understand that what's happening in Western New York may not be happening, you know, in Staten Island. But we have voices from everywhere, and we just massage it. And we also know that people expected us, because we're Democrats, not to be able to figure it out. right? They're like, oh no, these people can never do that. They're not monolithic. They're not of one mind, and everybody's got their ego and so on and so forth. And so we felt compelled after what you described, what people had gone through watching the Senate go through iterations of leadership that unfortunately, in many ways didn't end well. They expected us in all of our diversity to just dissemble. And we could not allow for that to happen, because what happens in the Senate, quite honestly, is what we believe should happen in America. We believe that our diversity is our strength, and we believe that if we could demonstrate how we can work together, how we can solve problems, how we can be in touch with people are really concerned about and really work with them to do it, we could demonstrate not only that we as the Senate can function, but America in its highest aspiration can function as well. So that's why we work so hard to get consensus. And that's why New Yorkers have rewarded the work that we've done by sending us back with larger and larger majorities. Again, we have now the third largest majority ever in this chamber. The other two large majorities has also been held by the Senate Democrats. And when Steve talks about, I'll be the longest serving Senate Democratic leader in the history of the state, that is true. But that is only 7 years. When I say only, I want to put it into context. People think of New York as a really blue state, and the reality is that in the Senate, the Democrats have only been, technically in charge for about 10 or 15 years, maybe 10. The better part of a century has been set by the Republicans in the Senate, and people don't realize that. So the fact that we've had the opportunity, because New Yorkers have invested in us and we have invested in them, to be able to have the kinds of policies that we have is why we're excited and why we will continue to build on the progress that we've already made. So when we talk about progress and we talk about what's on people's minds, the reality is that affordability has always been the center of what we are trying to do. And we look at it, from the very beginning. And that's why we actually, tackled the Empire State Child Tax Credit. I mean, a couple of years ago, the credit was only applicable for kids 4 and over. And so parents who had children under 4 weren't getting the tax credit. Didn't make sense to us. So we expanded that so that we could give some relief to children to parents when their child is born. We also looked at childcare. We had a $1.78 billion childcare block grant. The idea of that was to be able to expand eligibility for working families to access childcare with subsidies. We know that matters. And even when you look at pre-K, when the conversation around pre-K, which we were always invested in, when that conversation began, basically people were talking about New York City pre-K. And our conferences has expanded it to be a statewide endeavor. We understand that children have better opportunities to succeed in school when they enter with a vocabulary. In fact, I'd heard that they'd done some studies that says that, if a child's vocabulary isn't up to what it needs to be, by the time they're in the 4th grade, there's a prediction that they will wind up, unfortunately, in, not doing well in the criminal justice system. So not only does expanded pre-K allow, again, for parents to be able to get out of the child care cost situation, but also helps our children prepare so that they are able to succeed in school. So it makes perfect sense. We then did something that, Republicans had talked about for ages in terms of property tax cap. We actually capped property taxes in 2019, something they said we would never do. And the concern was if we actually cap the property taxes, which we know goes into our schools district, that schools would be underfunded. But we didn't let that happen. Again, there had been lawsuits over 30 years saying that certain school districts, certainly school districts that were, poor school districts, mostly Black and brown kids, underfunded. The state was sued. The state lost, appeal after appeal, and yet the money was not paid. In fact, that was one of the reasons that I ran for Senate, because I could not believe that after parents had realized that their kids' schools were underfunded and galvanized and organized enough to sue and then won, and then we still wouldn't pay as a state. It was unconscionable to me. And yet, that's where we were. Why? Because at that point, the Senate had decided that it was just too expensive to pay that money. So we look at the expense of not educating our kids. We look at the expense of not putting resources into our kids. And so, although we did cap the taxes, we also understood the commitment. This money was still owed. And we worked extremely hard, consistently and diligently with our partners in the Assembly, and ultimately fully funded the foundation formula for the first time since its inception in 2007. $25 billion put into education, put into resources, and making sure that our kids at least, have a fighting chance. And we're not done fighting. We want to see, the scores. We want to see the accountability. We're not done fighting. And as you know, there's a conversation about whether or not this formula is really the right formula at this moment. But it's just a constant focus, and even for higher ed, we looked at tuition assistance. We raised the award that you can get for TAP, and we expanded eligibility for TAP too, because we know that higher education matters, and we wanted to make sure that we could allow for people to afford higher education while we froze tuition in SUNY and CUNY. We've invested, $1.6 billion more into our public higher education system. And we continue to focus on workforce development that is consistent with what the workforce needs, so their education systems are mirroring what businesses actually are requiring. And so we're trying to create, again, the next, and while we're focusing on after-school programs, because we know that matters too, we're investing in creating, whether it's more sports, because we understand that we have an obligation to not only make sure this next generation is safe and educated, but has a diverse opportunity and experiences, because they're going into a global society. And we continue on with making, affordability more accessible for our seniors. The senior renters used to you couldn't make over like $35,000 to be eligible for tax relief, and we've raised that to $55,000. We have found ways, as you know, to cap the cost of drugs for diabetes. And we have actually, in terms of our entire population, in terms of our middle class, we've had the most sustained middle class tax cuts over 70 years. So we have looked at the kitchen table issues. We've decided that we can also be progressive in doing that, and that's why we've done this landmark climate change initiatives, because we understand we have to sustain our planet. and we have to take climate change seriously. So we've done that as well. Housing, I know in this group, you all are very, very interested in housing, as are we. And we know that the governor, a couple of years ago would come out with a housing plan, and it didn't get very far because we didn't see it as the holistic housing plan that we needed. We didn't want to continue investing in a program that was not producing the affordability in housing that we wanted. And we also wanted to protect tenants, which we initially did when we started out with our rent regulations, which used to expire every few years. They don't expire anymore. We changed rent regulations. We wanted to preserve our affordable housing stock while we figured out a way to create new housing. And this comprehensive package that we did not only allowed for the extension of 421A projects that were already in the pipeline, and I understand that's pretty successful. There are about 650 building owners who have indicated that they are moving forward, which will put, I think, about 71,000 new units online, 21,000 of which will be affordable. And we've created now the 485X, which will give us even more affordability, has worker protections in it, and is more in line with the philosophy of our not only legislature, but people who want to see housing that they can afford. We also invested in public housing because, again, on a federal level, they sort of stopped investing in public housing. As Steve said, I grew up in public housing, and I know how important it is to stabilize people's living arrangements so that they can actually go out and conquer the world. So we've invested in public housing not only in New York City, but beyond. We've also put hundreds of $millions into programs which will incentivize new housing, looking at state land or otherwise, so that people can start thinking about building affordable housing. Upstate, there was a conversation about buildings that were decrepit and falling apart and people walking away from that. So we put $40 million into infill housing so that some of these buildings that are falling into disrepair will be able to be rehabilitated. We've given money so that there's more flexibility for people who are hanging on, but for a couple of $100 might lose their apartments. You hear about those stories all the time. Somehow they can be put in hotels or shelters, but if they only had another couple of $100, they could actually maintain their home. So we've now put about $600 some odd million to allow for our social services agencies to be more flexible to help these families to stay in their homes while they're getting on their feet. And we've also looked at how we can help people who are in danger of losing their homes around mortgage issues, and put another $40 million to help those homeowners, not to even talk about what we put into legal services to be able to help prevent eviction. Our whole focus has been on affordability. And, even in terms of, we've continued, obviously, with the regional economic development plans, putting hundreds of millions of dollars into various regions because, one, size doesn't fit all. What works here might not work there. We've invested certainly in agriculture in wonderful ways that have not only, it's been difficult, obviously, with all that we've been through economically, but one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that we connect our farmers more with the needs here on the ground. And I was just at Feeding Westchester, which is just an incredible program, and they talked about Nourish New York and how our investment in making sure that fresh produce gets into places where it's most needed and gets out to people. It makes a difference. We've invested in small businesses. We've tried to incentivize them with tax credits and highlighting them. MWBE, our conference is extremely focused on making sure that in the hundreds and billions of dollars that we spend, that we are giving opportunities to minority and women-owned businesses to also be part of this a wonderful, wonderful tapestry of entrepreneurship. I think I can, just kind of go on and on to explain to you that we are successful because we get it. We understand that people care about safety in their communities. And we have invested in communities, whether it's working with violence prevention, our local law enforcement. We've found ways also to make sure we do sensible gun laws. And so we tell people, you should lock up your guns. You got to do that. We have red flag laws so that if somebody is looking like they're in danger of doing something horrible, that their weapons can be confiscated. We've banned bump stocks. We've done a number of things to make sure that communities are safe. We do background checks. We do sensible things. And yes, we do criminal justice reform because many people understand that you can have justice without finding ways to, say, penalize people because they can't afford to pay bail. So we did do criminal justice reform for people who committed misdemeanors as well as nonviolent felonies. However, if you are a repeat offender, you are subject to bail laws. And despite what people believe that, you could do anything and nobody's asking for bail, it's not true. We did not change bail for violent felonies, rapes, we did not. But what we did say is if you indeed are accused of a misdemeanor, then you shouldn't spend 3 years in Rikers Island waiting for somebody to hear your case because you didn't have a couple of $1,000s to get out. We want criminals to be criminalized. We don't want poverty to be criminalized. And we certainly don't want poverty to be criminalized when you're talking about misdemeanor and low-level offenses, because we do actually believe that you are entitled to your day in court. And the other thing that people do understand, that just because that person who's accused of a misdemeanor is not immediately arrested does not mean that they don't have their day in court. They go to court. So again, there are a lot of things that we have done. ERA just passed. Senator Kruger certainly was at the forefront of that. We codified our reproductive. That was the second thing that made me run the first time, because I wanted to codify Roe v. Wade. So by the time we got to it in 2019, the country had decodified Roe v. Wade. It was rather terrible. But the reality is that we did do it in 2019, and then we realized that we could indeed make sure that it was part of our Constitution, and that's why the push for the ERA. The other part of the ERA was that we, in New York, again, had been very diligent in going beyond what the Constitution called for in terms of protection, which our Constitution protects you for religion, creed, race, and that was it. And meanwhile, we'd evolved. We protect the LGBTQ plus community. We are not discriminating against people because of their national origin and their disabilities, age. There's all these things that we have, as New Yorkers, created laws to prevent. However, our Constitution was dated 1938, and nothing had been updated. So in the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, which again passed overwhelmingly, we also updated the protections for the people that we live with, love, and care about. So that's what we did. We spend an incredible amount of time talking to each other, but mostly talking to you, trying to figure out what we could do to make your lives better. Because most of us are like most of you. Yeah, I grew up in public housing, and I always contextualize that. My dad was a World War II veteran, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, served in the segregated army. When he came back, the GI Bill didn't apply to him. So instead of being able to buy homes or have a bank loan him money, but again, his counterparts were given access to home ownership. We were given access to public housing. So that's why I grew up in public housing. And I went to public schools. That's why I care about public schools. When my mother, who typed 100 words a minute, wanted to work for corporate America, she couldn't because they weren't hiring people that looked like her. And she would watch her white counterparts, sometimes hunting and pecking, and her fingers could fly. But she went to New York City and worked because they had civil service, which again, on a national level, apparently they don't want, but they had civil service, and she was able to pass the test. She got to be ultimately the head of the steno pool at the Corporation Council in New York City before she had to leave because there was no child care to take care of my brother and I. I was very sick. I was asthmatic, but my dad worked for Western Electric at that time, so you heard that I worked in the phone company because my daddy did. But the opportunities for him were always basement level. All the black people who worked in Western Electric at the time stayed in the basement, period. No matter where you came from, you could be my dad's boss because that's how it was. I have had a life that is extraordinary based on the circumstances. What happened in the intervening time where people of vision, allies, people came together and said, this isn't right. That isn't right. Why is this? When I was in New York Telephone, I was in the business office. At that time, women, basically, you were in the business office or you were an operator. Those were your options. And a class action suit was filed, which allowed people like me to be promoted into sales and marketing, which is ultimately what happened, but 2 at a time, because they didn't want to change the system that dramatically. But guess what I did when I finally got my promotion? I met my husband, in addition to having a $20,000 raise and I got a company car. Who knew? I didn't know. And then, I was able to leave. The Bell system broke up. I went to AT&T and then ultimately left the company and started on another path, journalism and teaching and so on. And here I am. Didn't happen without people changing things. Didn't happen without people looking at rooms that didn't look like this, saying, you know what? These rooms can look different. People have things to bring to the table. People can break glass ceilings and other barriers. And we're better because we do. So when I look at where I am as the first woman leader in the history of the state, I know it's the result of so many people who came before me, who removed obstacles, who said this isn't fair. And that's why we're not afraid in our conference of ceiling breakers, of first evers. Those people who people thought could never, ever, ever get along. That's why we have a responsibility to prove that the investment in this dream bears fruit. That's what I want for New York. That's what I want for the country. And despite where we are in terms of where we think our politics can and cannot go, I hope that you hold in mind the fact that we have come an extraordinary way from places that none of us ever thought we'd come. And we did it because we had a vision of progress and because we have an ability and capability to transcend people's low expectations of us. So anyway, that's what I got to say.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. There's been talk of a special session. You mentioned things like climate and other things that would be happening in the new administration. Is it likely, and what would you hope to address in a special session if you do it?
It's unlikely. So therefore, I don't have to answer the second.
There it is. Well, then maybe I'll transfer to, how do you look at priorities for the coming budget season?
I think our priorities remain the same. It's what continues to bring us our success. We're focused on the people that we serve. We're focused on affordability. We're focused on making sure that we build on the progress that we've had and on the confidence that people have given us. So I don't say it's this or that. Basically, we go in with the same attitude of getting things done that people need us to do.
Bill?
Obviously, the events of yesterday were very disturbing and shaking. It was on the network news. It's all over the world. I know there's a piece of legislation in Albany. I believe Assemblyman Brownstein and Brad Holman-Siegel are pushing forward some ideas to help make it easier to get an approval to commit somebody for mental illness. Can you just talk about that and what else can be done in terms of, I think that's one of the biggest fears at our board meeting we talk about all the time, is the fear of the mentally ill and how we can do a better job of helping them to get off the streets, helping them to find a pathway to recovery.
Yes. Yeah. I think certainly we have all, especially in this post-COVID era, realizing that the emphasis on mental health has been too little. And we collectively have really invested more money than ever before. I think in this last budget, it was $1 billion that, again, was directed towards mental health in schools, expanding facilities, expertise, you name it. And so, again, we are always looking at ways that we can make sure that, again, people who need help get that help. And so I'm sure the conversation will begin again anew. It's not that it hasn't been, and obviously we're always concerned about people's rights, but we're also concerned about safety. So we will continue the conversation. We want to get to the right place. We want to stop prisons from being the repository of our, people who actually are mentally ill and need help. And we want to make sure that the facilities are available for those people. So it's something that we all rightfully have to care about, and we do.
Good morning, Madam Leader.
Good morning.
Given your commitment to affordability, I have an economic development question for you. So, given that the tech industry is growing, it's an important pillar here to New York's economy. The governor and the mayor has made some commitments to further its growth. The governor invested in Empire AI.
What do you mean the governor?
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, collectively, yes. Well,
was it $400 million that we passed?
This is true. This is true. So I was going to ask you. No, you're absolutely right.
It's a three.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a partnership. So I wanted to know what you thought the legislature could do to encourage
There you go.
more growth in the industry, because these are good, well-paying jobs, and a lot of them are grown with startup companies here in the city. So
Yeah.
we'd love to know what your thoughts are there.
Well, I appreciate the question, and I think because I was, teasing you about but it indicates that we're interested. I mean, obviously, the conversation, was very broad when we first began it around what was expected from Empire AI, but we were able to drill down to the point where we felt comfortable in investing $400 million to begin to do, because we do want to lead in this area, and we do know, as you all know, that there are some pitfalls that we want to make sure that we are addressing and working together so that people actually understand what the capabilities are, what the constraints are, and how to work well with it. For us, one of the things I did was actually create a technology committee so that there is a repository in the Senate for all of these kinds of issues. And I'm very, very happy that we are focused on that part, because we know that's not only the future, but that's our present. And so we are looking forward to the partnership, the conversation, and we're looking for responsibility, quite honestly, from the industry as well. And we also want to make sure, again, that people are not assuming. I was at Stanford at a conference, and one of the professors, I know you're not going to like this, but one of the professors asked, I guess ChatGPT or whatever. Like I said, I know you're not going to like this, but asked about, what is the definition of I think it was somebody who was, undermining the government or something like that. But anyway, at the end of it, it pointed to one of the professors who was actually there and explained that she was somebody who was anti-government and so on and so forth. And it was a frightening revelation, because it actually wasn't true. They don't know why that was said about this particular professor. Fortunately, people didn't escort her off the campus. They, did the due diligence and so on. But, the question about like where that information came from and how do you get it out? How do you not do this? Is still one that I don't think, as a country, we've really put our arms around, and we're going to need everybody to really sort of focus. I believe in Europe there's a little more constraints about with AI, and they're just not what we need here. So I am looking forward to our partners working with us. We will continue to invest because we understand that the future is here. But again, I'm looking for some responsible leadership in that area as well. Okay.
Andrea, thank you.
You're so welcome.
This was awesome.
It's been lovely.
I hope you come back.
Thank you. I'll come back. Thank you.